Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. Digging into today's Q&A. This is with Dale. Dale's a powerlifter and working on some shape change associated with some sled dragging. And so we talk about how this actually works because we can be selective as to how we're driving the shape change either towards the pelvis or away from the pelvis. So for instance, if we were to utilize the belt, the strapping system that we actually talked about during this call, we can apply the pressure to the innominate bones, to the ilium, and we can promote a shape change proximally in the pelvis. That's going to allow us to drive internal rotation proximal to distal into the ground. If we were to apply the pressure to the trochanter, we're going to drive the internal rotation from the hip itself into the pelvis, and we're going to drive an earlier representation of internal rotation. And so again, we can be selective as to how we do this depending on the needs of the individual. So Dale's doing some really good stuff with these sled drags, but we'll break that explanation down for you in this Q&A.
Okay, so I don't want anybody else in the room. So if somebody walks by, it'll grab them.
Yeah.
But all right, so I know for a couple of weeks now we've talked about some of my old school stuff that we used to do, box squats, and how it's affected in your model. Yeah. Now, one of the things that we used to do a lot is sled dragging, and I've seen a lot of your videos on sled dragging, and I'm trying to understand the influence of what we do to your model. So I'm gonna give you an example. So obviously I train with a lot of wides.
Yeah.
Just the nature of the beast, right? So we use like a 3-inch nylon toe strap, you know, to pull with.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. We do a lot of backward sled pulling with where we put the nylon strap, let's say around the trochanter. Right, where it hits the trochanter. We use a load light enough that we can breathe really well. We internally rotate the femurs about 5 degrees, put the foot pressure all in the arches, I mean, in the medial part of the arches, and drive back. Yeah. Is that creating a shape change for the wides that are out wide? Because of the two parts, because of the compression that we're putting on the sides.
Okay. So the premise is useful. Okay. When you're trying to hang on to some internal rotation. Now, here's the thing you're going to have to be careful of. Because of the population that you work with, you got to be careful that you're not creating an anti-orientation under those circumstances. Because if you give up foot contacts, okay, like if you give up the lateral foot contact, so if there's not enough lateral foot contact, then you're not going to be emphasizing relative movement. You're going to create an orientation. Now, from a powerlifting standpoint, might not be too bad because you are sort of reinforcing some elements that you would use to pick up heavy things. If the goal is from relative motion, which is what it sounds like, then you got to be aware of how you're pushing through the ground. Now, because you are pushing through the ground, because you are dragging some weight, I would expect that you would have a fairly strong medial foot contact. The thing you want to be careful of is that you're not lifting up the.
Right. Yeah. We coach is to sense the outside, but kind of put an emphasis on the inside. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you want to stay inside. You want your turn to be inside of your base of support. Right. So under that respect, great. The pressure on the trochanter, great. The pressure through the pelvis, great. Okay. Because again, it's gonna help reduce. I don't know if it's gonna reduce the orientation, right? But at least it's not going to promote more of it. And so that might be the buffer that you need from a training perspective that allows you to lift with less discomfort, more performance, kind of a thing. So the premise is, I'm like very cool with the premise. What kind of you have a belt that's attached to the?
It's a toe strap. You know, our car toe strap.
Okay. And it's like you said, it's like 3 inches wide.
It's nylon. It's like 3 inches. It's really soft.
Okay.
It cradles your glutes and comes around.
It's not like a spud. Is it a spud strap?
No. This is actually a strap you tow cars with.
Okay.
Right.
Awesome.
It
stands to reason that only a powerlifter would go, yeah, let's use the one that we tow the cars with because we're going to be pulling enough weight.
Well,
right?
it's back old school because we used to just have different size tires, with cement in it. So, and that's what we used to pull.
I have done that in the past. I used to go to a little elementary school behind my house and drag tires with sandbags in them. Yes, I was poor and I couldn't buy a sled, so I made one out of an old tire. And
now it's a little better.
Yeah.
All right.
Tires
so there's
man. That's all I had.
There's one more that we do that I want to ask you about. And it's where we'll pull it sideways, right? And pushing, once again, medially rotating or internally rotating the back leg, the working leg, the leg that's facing the sled.
I know what you're doing.
5 degrees.
Yeah.
As you push off, mainly, say once again, working on that inside, the medial arch, right?
Yeah.
Pushing out.
Yeah.
As you lift the right, as the away leg lifts, you kind of rotate your zipper towards the femur just a little bit, so you get a little.
Which one?
The non-working leg.
Yes. So
Okay. I know what
you're doing.
And once again, we've got it on the trochanter again as we're pushing through, and it seems to make the hip give a little bit.
Yeah.
The two sides.
Like basically what you're doing is you're just hang on. You're just kind of squeezing in. Whoops. You're kind of squeezing in like that. Like, correct?
Well, I think of it more as the innominate bones moving.
Well, if you're pushing through the trochanter, you're doing that, but you're doing it through the hip. So you're doing it from here medially, right? If you move it up and you put it on the iliac crest, now you're going to get much more of that type of a shape change. So you have to decide. You have to decide
which one you want.
Okay, hang on. So if I create the shape change here, what I'm going to end up with is more proximal to distal IR, because I'm going to hold that shape change as I'm pushing into the ground with my leg towards the sled. If I put it down in the trochanter, I can drive more IR from distal to proximal and then promote the change that way. So you have to decide. It's like, do I want an early representation of that IR that's coming up from the ground, or am I trying to deliver more IR into the ground?
Okay.
Does that make sense? Do you see the difference in the two?
Yeah, I do. I know that when I do it, I feel like I'm ready for my Saturday Night Fever walk.
You're ready for the what?
My Saturday Night Fever walk.
Oh, sweet. Do you do the
a little bit of that? Yeah. Just when you start walking, you can feel the difference after I've done around with that.
Yeah, you'll most likely have a little bit more internal rotation on the lead leg. Yeah. Fun fact: I've seen Saturday Night Fever 150 times. True story. True story. It's one of the greatest movies ever made. Hands down.
I just watched it again last week.
If you haven't seen Saturday Night Fever, if you have not seen Saturday Night Fever, you can't be my friend. True story. Grace, I'm telling you, don't be shaking your head, girl. It's like, I know my movies. Digging into today's Q&A. This is with Manuel. This actually builds on a conversation or a series of conversations that we had on some of the Coffee and Coaches conference calls and a couple of other calls where we've been talking a lot about internal rotation and the representations of how we're taking force from the ground and then reapplying it to the ground, and then what shape changes need to occur. So those of you playing the home game, let's take a look at the pelvis real quick. So we're talking about the IR representation of the pelvis here. And remember that we can drive this in two different ways. We can drive it from femur into the pelvis. So we have internal rotation that's coming up from the ground through the hip into the pelvis to promote the shape change, or we have the proximal shape change first, and then we're driving the internal rotation down back into the ground. So we have early and late representations of internal rotation. And so we talked about sled drags, how we can manipulate the belt position to help us influence each one of those. And with Manuel's question, what we did is we took it to a split stance. So Manuel's a weightlifting coach, so he talks about split jerks a lot, but we can use this in any split stance activity where we'll see the compensatory strategies that come up from the ground or the compensatory strategies that we're delivering to the ground. And then we can start to determine how we're going to structure a coherent program. So if we were using sled drags again as the example, how we're going to position the belt, how we're going to cue the activities to promote whether we're influencing internal rotation coming up from the ground or down from the pelvis. So thank you, Manuel, for this question. It's going to help a lot of people.
Hey, Bill, to follow up on Colin's question, you said that if the force doesn't travel down to the apex of the sacrum, then the pelvis would have to orient to produce IR from an ER position.
Okay, so we're talking about the yield, right? So the connective tissue behavior. So it's where do you want the delay to occur? So you got to think about the shape change of the pelvis as I'm going through middle P. I'm assuming an IR representation of the. Hang on, folks at home, right? So the IR representation. So that's moving into that position, right? So this is going to move me into a nutated sacral position, right? I'll get eccentric orientation posterior lower. Okay. And then I have one side that has to move slower than the other. And that's going to be where the delayed representation is going to be because of the shape change. Okay. So I have the ilia that is basically compressing the base of the sacrum. Okay. And so the delay is going to move from the base of the sacrum towards the apex of the sacrum, because that's where I have the connective tissues available that can now distribute the energy for the yield. Okay, it's got to slow it down. So those tissues will expand. They're going to absorb energy, because next thing that's going to happen, I got to snap those babies back into an overcoming representation to push the IR into the ground, right?
So the same thing is happening when I see people do a split jerk, right? And then instead of being in an upright position, their pelvis is forward and they have to lean forward as they're catching overhead.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. You've got to think about this, dude. You've got a combination of factors there. You got people that are going to do whatever it takes to assume a position that puts the weight in a space that they can hold it overhead. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but again, this is where you get to be the great coach, and you go, okay, I'm willing to accept that technique under these circumstances. And then I'm unwilling to do so otherwise, right? You're going to do everything that you can to make sure that obviously people are doing things in a safe and effective manner, because I know that you're a good coach. But yeah, you're going to see stuff like that.
Okay.
Especially think about this. Somebody misses their groove by whatever degree, and they're going to move wherever they have to go underneath the weight to make sure that they capture it so they get their score, right? Otherwise, missed lift.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was curious about that. So my question is a follow-up from a discussion that you had with Dale last time about the sled drag. And you guys were talking about the position of the belt.
Yep.
On the ilium versus on the trochanter.
Yeah.
And you're saying how you're getting IR from, based on that placement, you're getting IR proximally if you have it on the ilium, and a little bit more distally if it's on the trochanter. And so then my question is, based on, from a powerlifting or weightlifting perspective, what's the difference / utility or / scenario where we would want to differentiate between the two? Like,
okay,
where would you want to use those?
Perfect question. Okay, you're working on the jerk today. Okay, lead leg versus trail leg. There's the difference, okay? Where are you having the greatest issue in capturing the internal rotation? Okay. So if you were seeing the EARD compensatory strategy on the lead leg, okay, that would be somebody that's having issues. Okay, we can tie this into Colin's question. That would be somebody that's having trouble capturing the IR from the ground up, right? And so under that circumstance, I got to make sure that I got a femur that can direct the force from the ground to the center of the pelvis. Otherwise, as that force comes up, it misses the pelvis and it goes around the bend, so to speak. It goes around the outside of the hip instead of going straight up into the pelvis, which is where you want it to be, right? Okay. So again, so you drop the belt a little bit lower, and you want to emphasize trying to move the femur into the IR position to promote the shape change proximally. Okay. If I had a trail leg issue, so this is, let's just say you got a left foot lead, right foot back jerk. This is the person that is opening the pelvis too far to the right, okay? Or their knee is deviating away from a vertical position, or their back foot is turned out, like they pivot out on the ball of their foot to capture their jerk. Under those circumstances, slide the belt up and get the ilial shape change. Okay, that is going to be a proximal shape that I got to drive down into the ground. Do you see the difference between the two?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's just what direction are you going to be driving this internal rotation? So again, if you look at this from the perspective of space-time, okay, the energy comes up from the ground on the lead foot. It's got to go through the femur. The femur has to be able to move into IR to promote the shape change in the pelvis. On the back leg, I got to start with the shape change and then push the IR down. That's the difference in strategy. Mm-hmm. Subtle, yes. Useful, yes.
Yeah, because the back leg tends to have more orientation at the pelvis.
You see that a lot.
Whereas the front leg tends to have more deviation at the femur.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what I see. Because yeah.
It's just direction. It's literally just the if you think about it as a directional thing, it's like, okay, where am I starting from? So if I'm pushing through the back leg, it's got to come from me down to the ground. Yeah. And so I got to have the right shape, and then the femur is going to follow, and then I'm going to drive the force into the ground on the back leg.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But it goes for any split, like it goes for any split activity, right? Right. Same principle.
Okay, yeah, so that makes sense to me for that movement. I was coming into it thinking more of like say a squat or a deadlift, in the way that Dale uses it, but it's still used for the jerk.
We can hang on. We can still talk about that, right? Because we have force absorption and force production, mm-hmm. right, in both scenarios, right? So as I descend, I have to absorb energy, right? Same principle. If you're having trouble acquiring position on the descent, then drop it to the trochanter. Okay. If I'm having trouble coming out of the bottom, that's where I have to take the force or the energy that I've absorbed, change the shape, and start driving it back from me into the ground. So standing up from the squat is proximal to distal, right?
So you'd put the belt on the ilium.
There you go. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Like I said, a subtle difference, but again, it could be the difference.